Tell me how you're gone without a trace. Hide behind those creaky doors, whining as they slam right in my face. I'm hoping that someday they'll open, but for now.
Welcome to St. Mary's County, Maryland. Today is a cloudy day in early June, and we're here to help with an oyster restoration project. Here, along with volunteer members of the St. Mary's River Watershed Association, we're working to bag oyster shells. The St. Mary's River Watershed Association is working to boost the oyster population through the creation of oyster bags. Oysters can't grow unless they grow on something hard, and more than any other material, they prefer to grow on top of other oyster shells. And that's where this massive pile of oyster shell comes in, as Emma Green, Executive Director of the St. Mary's Watershed Association, explains.
So these shell are destined for the St. Mary's River. What's going to happen with them, we're going to bag them, we're going to power wash every single one of these bags, and then they're going to go into a tank outside of St. Mary's College. We're going to fill that tank with river water. We're going to buy baby oysters, oyster larvae from Cambridge, and we're going to introduce that in there, into that tank. And so each one of those oyster shells is eventually going to have 8 to 10 baby oysters in them.
But let's back up a little. Why are oysters so important? And how did we get to the point where we need to restore their populations? Oysters are the unsung heroes of the Chesapeake Bay. Not only do they provide us a source of food and a source of income to many watermen, but they also make up a key part of the bay's ecosystem. As oysters grow and reproduce, they adhere to each other and create vast oyster reefs, which provide a habitat for many animals. These reefs also give creatures space to hide, hunt, and grow. Oyster reefs also help stabilize shorelines and mitigate the eroding effects of storms and floods on our coastlines. Perhaps most importantly, however, oysters are incredibly proficient at filtering water. A single oyster can filter up to 50 gallons of water in a day, filtering out both harmful pollutants and clouding sediment that impedes subaquatic vegetation growth. Oysters used to exist in vast abundance. At first, oysters were harvested individually, with tongs. But in the 1800s, the invention of the oyster dredge skyrocketed the output of the oyster harvesting business. Dredges would scrape along the bottom of the bay, picking up large amounts of oysters while also muddying water and destroying wide swaths of vital bay habitat. In the 1850s, more than 1.5 million oyster bushels, a bushel being approximately 100 oysters, were harvested from the bay each year. By the 1880s, that number was closer to 20 million. Over time, a combination of pollution, disease, and, of course, overharvesting caused severe damage to the Chesapeake Bay's oyster population. Today, the bay is estimated to contain less than 1% of its historical oyster population, a statistic that many organizations, such as the St. Mary's River Watershed Association, are trying to change. Bagging these oyster shells is just the first step in bringing new oysters to the bay. The members of this group are aiming to restore as many oysters as possible, and with this massive pile of oysters here, they've got their work cut out for them.
I assume you're going to help too?
Oh, always.
Oh, good. There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. While working, I also come into conversation with one of the volunteers, who also works at a local oyster ranch. We get into conversation about the oyster harvesting business.
We have all of our cages out on floats. We lift up the floats onto the barge with a crane, go through each cage, separate the different sizes, put the smaller ones back in to keep growing, and send the ones that are big enough off to the restaurants.
What company do you work for?
Double T.
Double T.
Yeah, Tall Timbers Marina. They have an event today from 12 to 3, so stop on by. I actually got to go there and work right now. Yeah.
What sort of event?
It's a beers and oysters event.
Hey, that'll do. This brings us to our next chapter. To understand more about overharvesting and what's being done to safely and responsibly harvest oysters today, I was able to visit the local Double T Ranch, an oyster harvesting ranch that not only prides itself on its commitment to sustainable harvesting, but also on serving really, really good oysters. So if overharvesting has caused such problems in the past, how can oyster farming be made sustainable?
So the way we farm them, it's not harmful to the local ecosystem. It actually creates habitat and it helps filter the water.
How's that?
We farm them in cages, so it creates bottom structure for species to live in. There's a lot of specific species that only live in oyster reefs, like skillet fish and oyster toadfish and things like that. This time of year, you actually see like eggs and stuff on the shells. They're breeding, in the oyster reefs too that we create. And then all these shells we save and we send them to different restoration projects, and they'll go back overboard because oysters need a calcium-rich substrate to strike on. So you have these shells that go overboard, and oyster spat will come and strike on the shell and grow a whole new reef.
So it's kind of cyclical.
Yeah.
You eat the oysters, and then you use the oyster shells to make more oysters that you can eat, to use the oyster shells.
And this type of farming is very restorative. Oyster farming is probably the most restorative type of farming you can do.
Alrighty. So, can you tell me what it is that you're doing right now?
We're shucking oysters.
Alright.
For the raw bar. You can go a few different places. You can go in from the hinge, the side, or the front. I usually go in from the side, and the spike goes from the bill.
The bill?
Yeah, this is what you call the bill of the oyster.
Okay.
Yeah, you pop it open like that, and there's an abductor muscle on the inside. It's right around here.
Oh.
So you can get in there and look a little bit.
Whoa.
And then you slice the abductor from the top shell. Make sure it's cleared all the way. And then that top shell's off, and it's still attached on the bottom, so you just sweep it through there, and then it's cleared.
Wow. Okay.
Shucked ready to eat.
Whoa.
There you go.
Okay, and is it, you said that they're sometimes grilled, sometimes eaten raw. What do you recommend?
Yeah, for a first time, or if you're a texture person, you might want a grilled one. But I'd recommend eating it just raw with some lemon, then you get the most taste of the oyster.
Okay, and you said
super large.
lemon as well?
Yeah, I would go some lemon.
A drop of lemon
I
too.
do lemon and then a little bit of like cocktail.
Yeah, if you want some
I'm
cocktail or
doing an
horseradish.
awful job of squeezing this lemon. I don't like how closely you're recording me now. Do this.
Stab them and peck them up, or you can throw it down with the shell.
Alright. That was really good.
The taste is all good. You can just go right
have it?
Thank you. Well,
Yeah,
that
no
was
problem.
my first oyster experience ever. I don't know how to feel about it.
About another dozen.
Yeah, alright. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Wow. This is a very odd texture.
Yeah.
One oyster filters 50 gallons of water. So imagine a cage with thousands of them.
My god. Imagine how clear the bay could be.
are bagging up today came from Double T Oyster Ranch.
The oyster I just ate, that's gonna be out there one day.
They actually have a really cool life cycle. They're free swimming larvae when they first start out, and they swim around in the water column until their shell gets big enough where they sink to the bottom.
Another dozen roll.
And then once they sink to the bottom, they move around with this little foot they have, and until they find a good substrate to strike on. And once they strike, they attach to that substrate, and they never move again.
Huh. What happens to the foot?
I don't know.
I have so much to Google about this.
Yeah, they're super interesting little creatures.
Yeah.
After that impromptu, tasty interlude, I had a chance to visit the Ophorans, members of the nearby Friends of St. Clements Bay Association. This association has been working with members of the public to increase oyster populations in their own backyards. Volunteers are given oyster cages filled with juvenile oysters that they hang over the edge of their docks. Over time, these juvenile oysters grow strong and large and create their own mini ecosystems inside the cage as a byproduct. The Ophorans were kind enough to haul up their cages to let me see what this kind of mini ecosystem can look like, and explain how the oyster cage system works.
Wait, so you guys have 2 of them?
We have 6 of them.
As we shook out these cages, we found everything from crabs to fish to insect larvae and sea squirts. Oyster cages such as these not only provide filtration in small estuaries like the St. Clements Bay, but also create vibrant habitats for wildlife. The oysters in the cage also benefit from this arrangement, gaining protection from any sort of predators that might harm them in their early years.
So what they do is they seed them with spat, and then they grow all winter protected in the cage where nothing can eat them.
After we check out the oyster cages, we head inside. Norm and Shelly are working on one more initiative to help with the restoration effort. They explained how they first got involved with their work and what it's led them to since.
So Norman was first looking at getting involved in trying to restore the submerged aquatic vegetation because he has a horticulture background. So he started studying it, and he's reading all these papers and stuff and learning that, like, one of the big problems is that water quality monitoring is, like, there's a lack of water quality monitoring in the bay in terms of being in these little like side areas. Like, there's a lot of monitoring right in the main stem of the bay. But there's like all these little mini ecosystems back here, and they're not being monitored. Norman was looking at that and going, why can't this be automated? And there are like automatic systems that do it, but the automatic systems are like hugely expensive, like $20,000 plus.
So Norman got to tinkering and created his own water monitoring devices. These Bay Observation Boxes, or BOBs for short, are low-cost automated water quality monitoring devices that collect and send water measurement readings. These readings can then be used to give information that's key for ensuring the health of oyster restoration sites, as well as furthering research about the bay. These boxes cost about $900 to produce as compared to the much more expensive normal water quality monitoring systems.
This is one I'm building. This is Bob 11, and these are the folks we're building it with, which is they're part of our little grant thing. And so this one's not done, but we're in the process. I'm in the process of putting it together. So there's like real quick, there's like a microcontroller here. That's a microcontroller. That's the brains of the operation. This is a cellular modem. That's what sends the data. And then these are what are called breakout boards for dissolved oxygen, electrical conductivity. They're stacked. And the bottom one is pH. This little sensor here is for air temperature and humidity. And then this here, which is not connected, but this goes out to, this is a sensor cable. And on the end of it is I've embedded in here, this like encased in resin to waterproof it. There's a temperature sensor there. And then right here, you won't be able to see it, but there's another temperature sensor that's encased in this cable. That's my air temperature outside the box. We have like QR codes that we put on the top of them so that if people come upon them like out in the wild, you're not tempted to like steal them or vandalize them or anything. So we have these little QR codes that the students created, and they have like the little Sherlock Holmes logo on them, but they could scan them and that would take them to the website that would explain like, hey, what are we doing here?
These boxes are created in classroom settings, often with the help of local kids, who are then able to learn more about bay restoration and water quality through the BOBs. In this way, conservation is made more understandable and accessible to those who can benefit from it the most.
Last thing I want to show you is the low-tech way that we have to float these things. This is just PVC pipe. This is modified, what's called a Taylor oyster float. They put these floats together, they're much bigger, and then they suspend a cage in the middle of the thing, and that keeps the oysters up off the bottom where there's more food and stuff. And so what I did is just borrowed that idea, and this sucker floats out there, and we mount the bob right on top of here. I don't have one out there now, but yeah, we can just attach them to like docks and stuff, like bolt them right on. So yeah.
There are many aspects to consider in building these monitoring devices. The data is critical for effective and sustained oyster restoration. It's a lot of effort to deploy, maintain, and create the BOBs. However, Norm and Shelly are still working on improving the design. If you see a box like this hanging off a pier somewhere, it's likely collecting data that can be used to better the bay. A week later, we're back in St. Mary's County. Today, the St. Mary's River Watershed Association is working to deploy reef balls at the St. Mary's River. Reef balls, these huge concrete structures, are meant to stimulate growth of new oyster reefs. Their porous structure allows for increased water flow and oxygen access for the oysters that will inhabit them in the future.
Max, you swim?
I can, yes. Yeah. Better safe than sorry, right?
And with that, the last of the reef balls are loaded onto the boat, and we take off to the deployment site. In time, oyster larvae will settle onto these reef balls, growing on top of one another until the beginning of a new oyster reef is formed. On this day, we dropped off more than a dozen reef balls. In total, more than 282 reef balls have been deployed by the St. Mary's River Watershed Association this year. Oyster restoration is an ongoing effort, one that draws from many different groups and initiatives. As it stands, there is still much work to be done in order to bring the bay back to its historic oyster levels, but through the efforts of many, oyster populations are slowly on the rise. It's hard work, but for the future of the bay and those that live there, it's vital work. Also, before you go, my name is Max. This mini documentary is my senior year project for high school. It's something that I spent a lot of time on, and since I've never done anything remotely similar to this, it's been a learning experience through and through. Thank you so much for watching the entire thing through, and thank you for taking the time to pay attention to these restoration efforts. It's really important work, and it also deserves to get more visibility, and especially funding. If you want to learn more about the organizations featured in this documentary, please look at the description or the comments of this video. I will be tagging and linking as many of the different oyster restoration initiatives as I can. I learned a lot during the creation of this video, but I also met some really wonderful people who I would like to highlight. Thank you to Emma Green, the Executive Director of the St. Mary's River Watershed Association. Thank you to Norm and Shelly O'Foran for letting me interview them about the bobs. Thank you to Double T Ranch for letting me taste test. And thank you to all the volunteers who I worked alongside. And thank you to you for watching this.